We expect Scotland's schools to be safe environments for all, but over recent years, staff working in them have been reporting an alarming rise in classroom disruptions and violence. In that light, a group of education experts today called for new government guidance to recognise the need for sanctions to restore order. The Commission on School Reform wants head teachers to be free to suspend or exclude unruly pupils. We invited into the studio the Commission member Carole Ford, who's a former head teacher of Kilmarnock Academy, and for another perspective on the issue, we were also joined by the education writer and former teacher, James McEnaney. Carole, how big a problem is bad behaviour in schools, and what kind of behaviour are we talking about?
I think the problem is very big indeed. And I'm saying that from several positions. One is the sort of anecdotal thing, talking to teachers. One is what's been in the press, the violence. And the other is looking at what teachers say themselves, because they have been surveyed by at least two unions, the IS and the NASUWT, and the figures are really stark about what teachers are experiencing in classrooms. I think most of the two surveys that I'm referring to asked teachers within the last 2 weeks what happened. 97% of lessons were disturbed by phones, mobile phones. 67% of teachers experienced verbal aggression. 59% had a physical aggression, and 49% witnessed physical violence in the classrooms. That's in the 2 weeks prior to these surveys. So there is a serious problem in terms of violence, although that's at the extreme end. To me, observing teachers working in classes, the bigger problem to some extent is the constant questioning of everything that a teacher asks pupils to do. Why should I do that? Why do I have to sit here? A constant thread of sort of non-compliance with normal classroom behaviour.
And is that just being ignored just now? Because that, if you're calling for tougher sanctions, is what's happening now.
There's two issues in this. One is that there has been an ongoing narrative in Scotland for some time coming from the educational establishment, Education Scotland, the Inspectorate, I would say from the academic educational research community, that bad behaviour stems from teachers failing to create the correct atmosphere or ethos in the classroom. Simply untrue. It's simply untrue that teachers are causing bad behaviour. Now, what that does is it disempowers teachers, because when teachers have any difficulties in the classroom, they're more reluctant to seek appropriate help because they feel it is a slur on their professionalism. And the second thing is that one of the things we are calling for is an empowering of head teachers to use suspension, because when you have a system which says there's nothing that you can do that will get you suspended from school, no sanctions work.
But when you say that, it makes it sound like there are no exclusions from school at the moment. There was almost 12,000 in 2022-23.
But most schools are not excluding the children who are disruptive on an almost daily basis. And well,
that's 12,000 for a start.
Well, 12,000...
Sounds like quite a lot to me.
When you observe what's happening in classrooms, teachers they have no sanctions to use, because when they give things like punishment exercises, detentions, children actually just fail to do it, and nothing happens about that. Exclusions now are almost exclusively for things like, the major incidents, and the major incidents are much more profuse than they used to be. But what we've got is this underlying current of non-compliance and difficulty in the classrooms, and teachers having very few sanctions at their disposal. The sanctions that they do issue are not enforced, and then on top of that, it's the teacher's fault.
James, has Carole got a point with this, that teachers are just almost overwhelmed by this?
I've been reporting for a couple of years on this idea of teachers being overwhelmed. It's not new to say that teachers are experiencing an increase in disruption in classrooms. It's not new to say that teachers are facing an increase in violent and aggressive behaviour. I think I reported on that about 2 years ago now. So that's definitely true, but I think you are right to point out this issue here. This thing, calling it a report, I wouldn't call this a report. There's nothing new in it. There's claims not being properly backed up with evidence in there.
Focus on what Carole's saying tonight.
But so even to focus on that, you're right, the 12,000 exclusions is still a significant number. And if the argument here seems to be essentially that we should be excluding more kids from school, and there seems to be a suggestion that we should be using it more for lots of low-level type disruption, that's quite a difficult argument to make, I would say.
Well, Carole?
I would say it for persistent, what people describe as low-level disruption is something like the teacher's attempting to teach something and 3 people carry out a reasonably loud conversation at the back of the room. The teacher can't teach over that.
So should kids be excluded for that?
Teachers, no. Pupils need to go through a step.
So what do you do?
The teacher would ask them to be quiet. Now, I've observed this many times in classrooms. The teacher asks the children to be quiet and they get a mouthful of abuse. That's when they get the verbal abuse. The teacher issues a punishment exercise or a detention or something like that. The pupil doesn't do it. And it's this persistent non-complying with reasonable requests. Now, that is not what children are being suspended for, and in the past they actually would have been. They should.
Well, James says they shouldn't. Let James. I'll come back to you in a moment. Just let James.
This idea. One of the things at the start of this, I say it's not a report, it's an opinion piece, but at the start of this document, it talks about everyone having the right to education without disruption, and fair enough. But the notion that you're going to start taking kids out of schools for these kind of low-level things. I am not in any way, shape or form dismissing the fact that teachers are facing an extremely difficult situation just now. I report on it every day. I speak to teachers all the time about it. But the idea that the solution to this kind of problem is to say we're not chucking enough kids out of schools is ridiculous, to be honest.
I mean, do you think more kids do need to be chucked out?
Absolutely.
So you're going back to 2007 when 44,000 exclusions happened every year.
What is required is that there needs to be a recognition that in any organisation, whatever the organisation, if people go beyond certain levels, they have to go out.
Carole,
if James started to swear at me in the middle of this interview, or I swore at him,
you're not in the Scottish Parliament.
But you would stop it right away, and you would never ask me to come back or James to come back. But teachers are expected to just put up with that. They are sworn at routinely. One depute told me that in the first 20 years of her career, she had never been sworn at. And in the last few years, she actually took a note, and she'd been sworn at 23 times between August and the October holiday week. And children in the past, because I was a head teacher, we wouldn't have tolerated that. And it is now tolerated in Scottish schools, and it shouldn't be.
Are schools too tolerant of this kind of behaviour, James?
Can I point something out before we go any further about the exclusion thing, okay? Even if you look at the stats now, with the exclusion rate having come down deliberately over time to address things like the link to longer term violence, the kids who are most likely to be excluded are children with additional support needs, children with disabilities, and children with care experience. If we go down this road of saying basically people are just getting a bit annoyed about this level of disruption, and I say again, kids, not adults, we're going to respond by removing them from education. What you're talking about here, the people you'll exclude from school, are children with additional support needs, care experience kids and disabled kids. And when I speak to teachers, one of the things the EIS were so insistent about when they released that report 2 years ago was that what we're talking about here with the increasing levels of disruption and right up to violence and aggression is lots of kids whose needs aren't being met. How exactly do you address that by throwing them out of school?
I mean, how do you deal with that? Kids with ASN, kids from poorer backgrounds who are more likely to be excluded as well.
Likely.
The problem is that we have children with needs, and the schools are actually not best placed to deal with a lot of these needs. If you've got a teacher in front of 30...
So you think they shouldn't be excluded? They shouldn't be there in the first place? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that the schools, we have asked in this report for a review of pupil support mechanisms, that does need to be beefed up inside schools. Enough, yeah. We've asked for stronger links to the agencies that are actually trained to deal with that. But the problem we have at the moment is that the current situation, everybody's education is suffering, including the people that James is talking about. They're sitting in these disorderly classrooms alongside everybody else, and we cannot recruit teachers.
Okay,
we have two major problems.
We're going to have to stop there. Thanks for joining us in Scotland Tonight.
No worries.
Okay.